think the big change is surely going to be the government is going to squeeze non-doms as far as they can go without them fleeing the country and losing them. And I think that's where you're going to get a lot of provisions. I think it's going to be many more anti-avoidance provisions, discovery provisions. And I think where the EU comes in is that, you know, if they pass these anti-avoidance sections, you've got the limit that do these infringe the 4 freedoms within the EU. So the only defence we've got left is the EU, isn't it?
Well, it's not the only defence, because you've also got things like human rights that are not EU and general good government there. I'm not certain that the UK is going to squeeze all of the non-DOMs. For the very high non-DOM net wealth individuals, the annual charge is a relatively small amount to pay for the benefit. I think what they're doing is gradually easing some of those on a sort of fairly modest income, but who've been claiming non-domicile status, just to persuade them that really it isn't worth their while. And so we'll end up with a much smaller number, but of very high net wealth non-DOMs. On the EU, yes, we're going to have increasing challenges to parts of the tax legislation on the grounds that it does restrict, or it's even discriminatory against those who are exercising their freedoms to move or to invest cross-border.
But the state aid's a massive thing, isn't it? Isn't that the biggest subject, EU subject at the moment?
Yeah, I think that's going to potentially dominate the next 10 years in the same way that the disclosures about US citizens with bank accounts undeclared in Switzerland led to FATCA, and it led to automatic exchange of information, and it led to the Common Reporting Standard. In the same sort of way, this investigation of state aids is going to run and run and run, and it's going to dominate the period of, certainly of Juncker's presidency of the Commission.
Yeah, well, I think the changes are quite dramatic. If you think back to the days of Margaret Thatcher, when she put a foot down and said we're not going to tax non-domiciles at all harshly, and you factor in the sort of populist view that we should be doing these kinds of things. If you look at my experience of clients, I would agree with Philip. The very wealthy aren't going to be that fussed, frankly, coming to the UK. I think the mansion tax might have a little bit of an effect on them, but we'll have to see how that kicks in if it ever arises. But I think, I do agree with Philip. I think the main thing that's happening is just to clear out the sort of non-domiciles who haven't got fabulous wealth. So I think the Russian oligarchs and so on are probably not going to be terribly affected, particularly as they're coming here as a safe haven. And relatively speaking, even the new rates of remittance sort of tariff, if you like, are modest by comparison with the savings, and also by comparison with the fact they are finding a safe haven, as I say, for a lot of money.
I mean, the revenue have got massive things in their armour. They've got Ramsey, they've got the GAR, special anti-avoidance provisions, they've got enormous penalties, they've got publicity.
I think publicity is probably their best weapon, because most of the people I see aren't doing any avoidance at all. They're simply coming to the United Kingdom genuinely. But you can see with some things like Starbucks and Google where the court of public opinion has had a large effect. And as I say, the populist factor is massive now, much greater than it has been, I think, for a long, long time.
And it's funny, in DOTAS, you're given a DOTAS number, and people imagine they're in striped pyjamas with their DOTAS number written and appearing on front of on the television. That can do you a lot of damage, can't it?
Yeah. As I say, my experience is not so much the avoidance, it's just simply people who are coming here genuinely set up where I think they're going to have to look much more carefully and plan themselves more carefully. We all know about the statutory residence test, which is beginning to take shape. But I think this non-domicile point is just probably the beginning of more changes, I think, as public opinion wants to tax them less benignly.